Hello and welcome to today's Atlantic Circle InConversation event. My name is Magda Joshi. I'm the Events and Alumni Engagement Manager at UWCA Atlantic. I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's event. The title is How to Organize Medicine, Tax and/or Private Money. And the alum whom we are featuring is Willem van Tets from the class of 77. Before we begin the event, I would just like to make a few housekeeping points, please. If you don't mind renaming yourselves on Zoom, it would help us identify you when we move on to the Q&A session, which will follow Willem's presentation. Unless you're asking a question, kindly remain muted throughout the presentation and use the chat function to comment or ask questions. The event is being recorded, so that if you like, you can return to this recording on the UWC Atlantic YouTube channel. I am now delighted to introduce Willem, who is our alum and who is the general surgeon in Amsterdam, a role which he's been fulfilling since 1994. Willem, in today's talk, will be discussing the most effective way to organize healthcare. We are delighted to welcome him to this series. Willem, over to you.
Thank you very much, Magda, for your introduction. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm very honored that so many people are willing to listen to what I have to say. I'd like to start off with a small video about the subject, about administration. Unfortunately, I can't start it myself because then you can't hear it, but Magda will give you the link, so you get to start the video yourself and look at it for 4 minutes, and then we go on with the talk.
I think, Willem, that most attendees have had the time to finish watching the recording. Those of you who are unable to watch it, just as a reminder, you can see it in the chat and you can watch it at your convenience. Thank you.
Okay. Well, this was just to kick off the talk. Of course, it's a satire and it's meant to be funny, but there's maybe a small element of truth in it, and how the government handles the healthcare or the public healthcare. But I will come back to that later. Yeah, healthcare always costs heaps of money. There's always a shortage, and the demand is increasing and increasing. And what are the causes that it increases are mainly, of course, increase of population. The number of elderly is increasing also. People are getting older and older. And it's a quite labor intensive industry. So you need lots of personnel. And you need many doctors and people to keep it up, and they cost a lot of money. Also, there are new techniques like the robot, operation robots. Chemotherapy is getting much more expensive. Nowadays, you have even immunotherapy, which costs also heaps of money for one patient. So how on earth are we going to pay for all this? We just can't. It's almost very difficult for a government to keep on funding all these expensive treatments. And of course, the last thing is that there's more and more administration coming on, which also costs a lot of personnel and a lot of people. My talk is not about a specific country. Oops, why doesn't he move? Now my slides are stuck, I'm sorry. Here, now we're back in business again. I'm not going to talk about a specific country. I'm going to talk about the European Union, about the members of the European Union. And of course, then you have to gather a lot of data. You have to gather a lot of reliable data. And the sources I used were from Eurostat, which is the General Directorate of the EU. They produce a lot of statistics. And my other source was the OECD, the Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development. This is an organization of which 24 countries are a member, and they exchange all their data about the economy, healthcare, and so forth and so forth. And I thought these two sources were reliable. Of course, we all know the principle: rubbish in, rubbish out. If your information is rubbish, then your conclusions also will be rubbish. But I hope that these data are reliable. To start off is quite a complicated slide. What you see here are the members, the countries of the European Union. On the right side, you see the percentage of the gross domestic product, so the money a country or a member of the EU earns each year, mainly through taxes, and how much percent of that amount they spend on healthcare. And you see there's quite a difference. For instance, Bulgaria or Romania spends about 5%, and France, for instance, more than 10%, about 12%, also Germany 12%. So they spend almost 3 times as much on healthcare as the poorer European EU members. On the left side, you see how much money is spent per capita, per person, per inhabitant of a country. And then you have here these vertical histograms that show the dark side shows how much, the dark color shows how much percentage is of how much of that money is comes from public funding from the state, and how much the people have to pay for themselves. And this is mainly paid for dentistry, plastic surgery. And what you see, which strikes me most actually, is the difference between countries that have about the same percentage what they spent on healthcare, and the difference each person gets. For instance, Bulgaria spends 7.5%, and their inhabitants only get about €1,500 a year. And if you compare it to, for instance, Poland, they get much more. So there's a lot of inefficiency here. Money is just draining away. It can be due to corruption or bad administration, but anyway, money is leaking away here. You can see here it's a bit better organized in Norway, Germany, Sweden. Holland. But you see there's an enormous variation in how the money is being spent and how governments are, what they are doing with the money. There's also quite a lot of inequality. Just to show you also a slide that I thought was interesting, were waiting times for hip and knee surgery among several members of the EU. If you, this is for the hip and below is for the knee. And this is the waiting time you have from the moment you go to your general practitioner until you get the appointment with the orthopedic surgeon to talk to him and to make a diagnosis. You see that this, well, up to 250 days, which is about 8 months you have to wait before you can see the specialist. And here you see the waiting times until you get the operation. So this is the waiting time from when they make the diagnosis and when they make the decision to do the operation until the operation is being done. Quite a long time. And all this time people are in pain and they can't function. Yeah, inefficient. And in my opinion, it should be, we should try to get a bit better. Here again, an overview of how money is being spent in each country per capita. The dark colored countries spend more. Sometimes even 4 times more than the light colored countries. So there's again enormous inequality within Europe and how healthcare is being organized. Another slide, I think we all know these slides, this how that it's increased the percentage on healthcare that's being spent from your gross domestic product. It's increasing and increasing. The United States is always on top, while only about 50% comes from tax money. So the other 50% is just private money. But the United States is always leading in these graphs. But in all the countries, it's all increasing and increasing and increasing. So can we afford to pay for healthcare? That's of course the main question. How are we going to pay for it? This is also quite a striking slide. That shows the difference between the people who have money and the people who have no money. So the difference between the haves and the have-nots. The light colored dots are the people with a high income. People with a low income are the dark colored dots. And you see here, oops, I'm so sorry. You see here for all the members of the EU that in these countries, it doesn't make a difference if you're rich or poor. You always get the same treatment and you get also the full treatment. But when you go more towards the left, you see that there's a difference. If you have no money, you can there's about 20. You can get up to 20% of unmet medical needs. So you need an operation, but you just don't get it because you don't have the money to pay for it. So also lots of inequality, and I think that's very unjust, and we must try to do something about that. Here, how nurses and doctors are dispersed over the EU. In this quadrant, you see that there are enough doctors and enough nurses in these countries. Mainly is that Scandinavia, Germany, Denmark. Here on the lower quadrant on the left, you see that there's a shortage of doctors and a shortage of nurses. For instance, in the UK, Romania, Hungary, Poland. So there's always here again an enormous variety in the quality and the number of medical staff that is present. Then, of course, we are being threatened by our decadent way of life, tobacco, diet, alcohol, of course, low physical activity. And funny enough, if you invest in tobacco stocks, they are the best investments there are. So they are growing and growing still, despite we are trying to say that smoking is not very, it's not good for your health. So it doesn't help very much because the tobacco stocks are still going up and going up and going up. Then we go to, of course, to obesity, which is now becoming a plague more or less in Europe. Here you see a graph through the years and the percentage of the population that is overweight. So they are not obese yet, but they have a BMI above 25. And you can see that that's up to 70% or 75% in the USA. So 75% of the population is overweight, of the adult population. In England, it's about 70% people are overweight, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. So that's also a thing that is threatening us. And yeah, how are we going to cope with it? Morbidity due to obesity. There are lots of diseases that come due to obesity. Sleep apnea, that you stop breathing during your sleep. High blood pressure, diabetes, arthrosis of joints, so you need new hips, new knees, etc., etc., etc. It costs a lot of money to treat all these patients. Another slide is also, yeah, actually I've got quite some depressing slides, I gather, is the increase of the world population. If you see how quick that goes, if you see how the world population is increasing in China, India, Africa, also in Europe, of course, but less. So the number of people are coming up and going up and going up and going up. And of course, the people here who are born in Africa, that's a bit of the migration problem that's also threatening Europe in a way. They're not going to stay there. They will come to Europe because that's where the jobs are and where you can maybe lead a more comfortable life. And where there's also enough food, etc. So these people, they won't stay here. They will come to Europe. And how are we going to deal with that? Then the people above 65, the pensioners, they've doubled in the last 30 years. They were 10% of the population in Europe, and now they are more than 20%. And of course, all these people need a lot of medical care. So how on earth are we going to pay for it? Of course, there are some suggestions to keep it down a bit, the demand for healthcare. Of course, improvements in lifestyle and diet, prevention. That's difficult because the food industry, of course, the economy has to blossom. You can't close supermarkets. You can't tell to a supermarket, I want you to get rid of half the stuff you are selling, because everybody has to make a profit and the economy always has to grow and grow and grow. So we will keep on eating and drinking because, yeah, that's the way it goes. Of course, less administration. I think that's important, as we've seen in the small sketch that started the presentation. We need, of course, cheaper prices for the industry so that they won't ask as much for instruments, for medication. And we can try to shift the treatment from clinical to outpatient treatment. So the people are being treated at home as a nurse, and they don't have to stay as long in the hospital. It's quite difficult to organize, but it's also a way in which we may make things more cheaper. And there's also a thing which, in my opinion, and also it has been written in several reports from Eurostat, is to encourage the private sector. So we have to try to get private money to add to the public money to get enough money to pay for the healthcare. Here an example how much percent is being funded by tax on healthcare. And again, in the US, it's only 50%, while they spend most of it. So that shows how much private money is there being spent on healthcare. And in the UK, for instance, 80% with the national health system, Sweden 80%. So there's almost also an enormous variety, but nevertheless, there's still a shortage of money. So there was a report from the European Union, from Eurostat, and they made a suggestion to enhance private healthcare, but in such a way that it is not that people are not being treated in private hospitals, but everybody is being treated in the same hospital, but that you have people who have a private insurance and that they get the same treatment, of course, with the people who have a public insurance. But in that way, you can add money to the system. And that's sort of a suggestion that's been done in this report, and I like it actually very much. It gives a greater choice, of course, for that's the advantage, who's going to treat you. The budget is being increased, is what it says, of course. And there are many other, as it says here, facts that can contribute to a positive way of healthcare by bringing in private health money. And there is enough money for people to pay for a private insurance, because this is a slide from the World Inequality Lab. That's a lab that's being created by students and fellows from the Paris Economic University and the University of Berkeley. And they did an investigation on how wealth is being divided in Europe. And what you see, that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. 10% of the richest people, they own about 32% of all the assets. And 50% of the people, the poorest, they own only 26% of all the assets. So 10% has more assets than 50% of the European population. So there's a quite an enormous variety in wealth. And these people, we can try to get them, to force them, or to, by legislation, to that they can't benefit anymore from public health care, but they have to pay themselves for private health care, of course, in a public hospital. And that way you can generate extra money. And they have the money to pay for it. So I think that would be a possibility there. But of course, it requires quite a lot of legislation. So here again, public money, state money, that's being put in the healthcare system, about 10% of your GDP. And if you add a compulsory private healthcare system to it, you can increase your GDP to a higher level, and that way create more money. You can compare, for instance, with an airline company. If you have an airline company, they have, I took this KLM, this is a friend of mine who was on the board of KLM, he gave me these numbers. And he told me with 10% of our seats, so the business class has gives 10%, has 10% of all the seats, they generate about 40% of the income of an airline company. So there's an enormous leverage. So the rich pay for the economy seats to get them cheaper in an airline company. And anyway, we should use the same principle, I think, in healthcare, where there's a possibility there. Maybe I'm going a bit too far now, but if you compare it with Atlantic College, if you look at Atlantic College, there's always a big hassle about the keep up of the castle. I've heard that the castle costs about £1 million a year just for the heating and to repair for the roof for leakages, which is an enormous amount of money, and each year it has to be paid. Of course, you have also salaries and pensions for the staff. And there was, I think that's now not the case anymore, but up to a few years ago, there were also empty beds, I understood, because only students with scholarships were allowed. And they couldn't fill all the beds, so that would cost them a lot of money. And that way, I think that was not a very good financial scheme to keep up the college. So what you can do for the college is you have your normal scholarships, but also give some beds to private students and let them pay not a scholarship or one tuition, but let them pay a double tuition or a triple tuition, because they have enough money to pay for it. And I think they would do it. They would also do it. So there's a possibility. Well, to get all this organized in Europe is quite difficult. The European organization is a slow working body. It's also a lot of administration, but I think in the end there's a good cause for it. The EU is organized, of course, by the European Commission. That's where Mrs. von der Leyen is the president of. And you have the European Parliament, they make the legislation. But these guys, the council, and they consist of all the heads of state, all the presidents, the MPs of each country, they make the decision in the end. So if they say no, they can make any law they want, but if they say no, it won't happen. And that makes it very difficult to come to get forward to new laws and to get forward into the future. So it's quite a slow working body, the EU. And I think we should try to alter that. And you can alter that in a way to get better politicians here in the Commission. Because the countries never send their best politicians to the EU. They always keep the best politicians for themselves, and they send the second-rated politicians to the EU. And I think that should change. You should make the EU much stronger, the European Commission, so you can get into the future. So can we control the budget on healthcare? I think there's a possibility. I think we have to do it through the EU. And because I think in the EU is the future. You must try to attract private money through compulsory private insurance when you earn when you have assets above a certain amount. Although of course you have to discuss it where the cutoff point is, but I think there's a possibility there. And you should give more power to the EU Commission to make legislation and give them hope that they get better politicians. To end with a small, maybe we can do this, Magda. You can start also this YouTube video. This was just to make it a bit more lighter, my talk. It was a hospital in Holland where they danced the Jerusalem Challenge. That is a song that was made to cheer us all up in these dark periods of the COVID pandemic. If you start this video, Magda, and afterwards we can maybe answer questions. Thank you.
Willem, I'm really sorry, but I don't think I have the link to this video. If there is a way for you to post it in the chat, that would be helpful.
You can't hear it, huh? Can you hear it? Can you hear it?
No, we can't.
Okay, well, never mind then. Anyway, that was my talk. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you very much, Willem, for sharing your thoughts and your experience with us. Now we'll turn over to our attendees for questions or comments. I've seen that some comments have been coming through on the chat, so I don't know if anyone would like to offer these comments directly here. If you would like to do that, feel free to unmute yourself and simply comment.
Well, since I'm here representing the US, I guess, ironically, and hello, Willem.
Hi, nice to see you, Ruth.
Ironically, I've spent much of my career advocating for increasing access to healthcare. And we all look to European countries and say, hey, maybe we can have a balance. Because certainly here, well, with the Affordable Care Act, which is now being expanded, and for those of you that don't know, it provides public funding for access to healthcare up to a certain income level, and which is really increased access to public health insurance. We still have a huge problem, and it's really is, you know, I don't know if there's this magic balance between public and private sector, but certainly there needs to be significant controls on private sector if it's really going to work. And, you know, in this country, we've had a really hard time getting those kinds of controls. And so there's huge inequities in access. People who have health coverage through their employers are far better off than employers who don't provide health coverage. And they're, you know, costs are going out of control. So as I said, there's no magic bullet, but it really needs to be some kind of balance, and we focus a lot on the people that I work with, a lot on access to prevention, because the costs are so high if you're not going to focus on prevention. But
I fully agree with you. Prevention is very important, but it's very difficult to realize prevention because our economy is the only God we all really believe in is the economy, and she always has to grow and she has to be satisfied. So for God's sake, whatever happens, never jeopardize the economy, because so they have to sell all their foods and all their hamburgers and all their fatty materials and whatever.
And the problem with prevention, of course, as you said, is that people need to sell things, but also there's no incentive for medical providers because, you know, they get paid for providing, hospitals get paid for providing the services, so not for preventing the services. So.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's the case everywhere, but of course, medicine should not be money driven. Of course, I think the healthcare should not be money driven. I think that's, but yeah, okay, but maybe that's in the United States a bit different than in Europe. I hope President Biden is going to change things. I hope he has the power to do that with Congress. Do you think that's going to happen, or is there a chance there?
Here's hoping.
Yeah.
The discussions are out there, but it will require some radical changes to the way things are being done, like getting rid of the filibuster to make it happen. But the pandemic, I think, has really opened up opportunities for big changes in the healthcare system and for access to healthcare and people's understanding of the importance of access. So there is some cautious optimism.
Okay, well, good news, good news.
Thank you, Ruth. Would anyone else like to comment? I think Peter has raised his hand, yes?
Hi, Willem. Sorry, I joined the talk late, so you may have touched upon this, but having lived in Italy, the Netherlands, and the UK over the last 16 years and their approach to funding healthcare, I mean, I was shocked in the Netherlands because it's supposed to, well, at least I thought it was a public healthcare system, but I had to pay 200 euros a month, you know, for my family to have the coverage, versus here with NHS, where I think they give far too much away, you know, even paracetamol sort of thing. So did you comment upon how the Dutch model, where there is a contribution, or at least that's my sense, there's a contribution, what more would happen in the model you're proposing where there'd be more private money? Because I see the contribution I made of 200 euros a month as a private contribution to a public healthcare system. Are you thinking of more than that?
Yeah, much more, much more. I think that we, because I showed in the slide the difference between the rich and the poor, and that's getting more and more and more. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. So you can try to get some of that money from the rich to invest in your healthcare system. So you give them a compulsory private insurance. So if you earn more than that, or if you have more shares than that, if your wealth is above a certain level, then you, by the state, by legislation, you're obliged to pay for your own healthcare, for your own insurance. And I think, yeah, that's fair in a way. But of course, yeah, where's the cutoff point? When are you wealthy and when are you poor? That's, of course, you have to make a decision there.
I think that Jan has his hand raised also.
Yeah, thank you, Magda. Hi, Willem.
Hi.
Good to hear you talk. Thank you very much. Very interesting. You showed us the health at a glance, the Europe big investigation, which you said you liked. Do you know what is happening with it? Is there a kind of result being presented to the European Union? Listen, this is what we advise to the European Union. Is this a call for change? Or so I'd like to know the status of that report, which you like, and you made your suggestions. And secondly, my other question is, do you have an example? You showed us a lot of information about different European countries, whether there is a country which is doing best given the model you are aiming for, which you're suggesting, and that it's practically being effective. So is there a success model which we could copy?
Well, I think Germany is getting close. In Germany, you're being treated in the same hospital as a private or a public patient. But the private patients, the private healthcare adds money to the public healthcare system, so there's more money available. I think the Germans have it maybe organized in the best way. Maybe also the Swedes, but the Swedes have, I think they have, it's almost 100% healthcare. But as far as I know, that Germany have it best way organized. For instance, when we were short of intensive care beds, you have the province of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. They also have 70 million inhabitants, same like Holland has. And we were short of intensive care beds during the COVID pandemic, and they helped us out because they had enough intensive care beds left, because it's just better organized medical system. And
yeah, but it's a very simple reason. As far as I know, my son, as you know, he works in Germany, and he pays a lot more on healthcare, like Peter talked about his 200 euros here in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So they just pay more. So it's a very simple economic system. They pay more, therefore they have more IC beds, intensive care beds.
Yeah.
So, but given that answer you gave about Germany, does that mean that in the report, which is the main report about the whole of Europe, that there is going to be a proposal to the European Union? Listen, we should change it in order, which you very clearly outlined in your presentation, that the future is not positive because we're getting a graying society, we're getting obese, all these, you know what's going to happen. So we have to prepare ourselves for that.
We do, but of course the EU works quite slowly. Anyway, this report means that they are thinking about it, and anyway, they are bringing it above the table. I think that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that they will use it. They will try to put this in legislation. Anyway, they are thinking about it and they are working on it. I think that's a good sign.
And you think the pandemic is helping us? That the fact that never waste a good crisis, that now people are more realistic, more aware?
Maybe, I think so. Maybe. I hope so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I can see that my colleague Keith has a question on the chat. Keith, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, Willem. Yeah, so it's I guess your slide is sort of about lowering the costs of sort of healthcare. Do you have any sort of suggestions, or have there any suggestions been put forward that can help lower the cost of medication from sort of the big pharmaceuticals? I guess especially with the US proposal about sort of the COVID vaccine patents sort of being waived and they're not being allowed to patent them. Is there any suggestions put forward which can help lower the cost? Because some drugs have increased over the years, but not minimize the innovation from pharmaceutical companies to continue developing new drugs.
Well, I mean, the pharmaceutical industry, they are very clever, because they know exactly how to handle their prices. In each country, they ask another price for the same medication. So they know in each country how the economy works, how the healthcare system works, and they know how far they can go with their prices. So they're always one step ahead. And I think that's the advantage of the European Union, that you can discuss for the whole of the European Union one price for medication. You say, we represent now, is it 450 million people? I want you to go down with your prices for chemotherapy or for antibiotics, painkillers, those sorts of things. So you have more bargaining power if you are a big union or a big group or society like the EU. I think there's a possibility there to get the cost down.
Great, thank you.
Did I answer your question or not?
Yeah, I guess if you were looking beyond sort of the EU, in sort of, is there any way of doing it without, as I say, sort of putting off companies from developing new drugs? Because you sort of read about the cases where over 5 years a drug increases 700% in price when it's exactly the same thing it was, just because there's no sort of limitation or legislation in place that stops them and limits what they do. Yeah. Or like drug companies get bought by sort of larger organizations, and then they just do whatever they want with pricing.
Yeah, they are in power, and they are also they can like they also did with between the United Kingdom and Europe. They were and the United States for buying the AstraZeneca vaccine. They were playing us out against each other, Europe against the UK, and they were playing. They are clever, and they are very, very witty, and that's difficult. But I think if you unite yourself together, you have much more power. You're much stronger. Yeah, you have to work together as countries when you bargain about medication and when you bargain with the pharmaceutical industry. You have to make it for them more difficult.
I can be. Thanks.
Yeah.
Unmuted. Can I go ahead and ask a question?
Kathy, please do.
Hello, Willem. Hello, everybody. And thanks very much.
You look lovely, Kathy.
Thanks very much for an interesting talk, Willem. Really interesting. I'd like to ask you a further question about the food industry. You did sound very despondent about the chances of ever stopping the food industry in its wrecking of health across the world. I think I share that, and I have thought this exactly the same for about the past 30 years. And but I wonder whether the climate's starting to change now, because post-pandemic we have actually seen moves to companies being actually taking steps to become slightly more ethical and not just profit driven. You know, that there is talk at the moment of companies having to have ethical requirements as part of their business modeling. I would love to see that. But obviously a lot of this depends on the appetite of governments to enforce it. What does everybody think about the appetite of governments to make a real shift? Because it's not medicine that's going to save us from this. It's clamping down on the food industry.
Yeah, I think you're right there. The problem is that, of course, unhealthy food is cheap, and as you've seen in this graph, that the number of people who are poor are only increasing, and they can't afford to buy healthy food, so they all buy cheap food, and cheap food is very often filled with sugars and fats. So that's difficult. So how are you going to do it? Do you have to subsidize better food for everybody? But that would make it maybe unaffordable. Yeah, I don't really have the answer to that, Kathy. Yeah, maybe you can make legislation to force companies, the food industry, to make fresh, healthy food. But you were talking about how many people live in the EU now, 450 million people. If you all want to give them good food, it's almost impossible. So that's also, yeah, we are also met with too many people, actually. As you see, the population is increasing, it's growing and growing. Yeah, maybe I just don't have the answer to it, how we can tackle it. Difficult. Overpopulation, that's a problem, I think.
Thank you, Willem. I see that Susie has raised her hand as well.
Hi. You just said something that made me think of a, how would I say, a dual way of approaching a problem. You said that that food may require, or food industry or food, the market would require subsidy towards the more healthy food. But at the same time, we're spending a huge amount of money on healthcare as you know, not as prevention, but once the problem has come, and it is a, you know, a shift in where the way we're doing. But I wonder if some of that money from the medical system would be pumped into supporting and sustaining better food. We'd be spending less on the medical side. It's a complicated, I know what I'm saying, it's very, very complex, and it's something that may take a generation or two to get to, and it's a cultural change. But it's a thought that struck me while you were talking.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very plausible way of thinking what you're doing. So you want to invest money in money. You want to use money from the healthcare system to invest in prevention. That's actually what you suggest.
Yes. Oops.
Something to think about.
Yeah.
But that means that then you're talking about fresh food, good food, and high quality food, of course, is scarcely produced. So how are you going to produce high quality food in a huge scale? I think how are you going to do that?
And yet we throw so much food away anyway.
Yeah.
Also good food. I mean, I'm originally Italian. I remember the years when oranges had to be and tomatoes had to be, there were trucks driving and then tractors driving over them because there was overproduction to keep the prices down.
Yeah.
We are doing quite a lot of stupid stuff.
Yeah, we are.
My husband works in the food industry and he tells me that we produce we're 7 billion people going to 8 billion people in the world. We produce for 8 billion and still there's people dying of starvation.
Produce for 12.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's of course how the free economy works. But maybe in the future we are able to tackle that problem and to make good legislation to get it to solve it. But I don't know. Yeah, but of course, but we are talking not about food in itself. We are talking about high quality food. So of course, the food industry, maybe they make enough food for everybody, for 8 million people. But of course, we are talking about high quality food. So how can you make high quality food for everybody? That's difficult, I think. Fresh food.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
I can see that Brendan's raised his hand also.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Just for those who don't know, I know Willem knows this, I've just recently retired as a doctor, so also I've seen the inside of the UK health system. I just wanted to know what you thought of something which is maybe a bit counterintuitive coming from a doctor, you might think, but you know, you showed the graphs of the percentage of GDP. One of the things I used to say when I was in management, that if they could, the health services within countries would like to spend 100% of the GDP. In other words, doctors are never short of ideas. There's always new things. You know, you mentioned some of the immunotherapies that are coming in now. These cost hundreds of thousands of euros per person per year. So, and you know, you've probably had this experience of, you know, you see someone in your clinic and they're saying, I read in the newspaper that, and then you can fill in the next bit about the latest research study. Everything that comes along seems to cost more than the thing before it. I could probably think of 1 or 2 things in my career where something came in and it was markedly cheaper and better than the previous therapy. It's like a nuclear arms race within medicine, and a lot of it is fueled by public and professional expectations. So I just wanted to know what you thought of whether or not there has to be more of a sense of realism about what treatments are going to be available, particularly within a publicly funded health service.
You mean that you're not going to operate people who are older than 90 years old or something like that, right? That you say, well, or your quality of life, you have a bad quality of life, so why should you be treated? So is that what you're meaning, more or less, or not?
No, that obviously could be one of the things which I'm sure most people would not have great trouble immediately thinking, well, no. But it's just whether or not, say, for example, take a hypothetical example. If you had a medication with a 1% improvement in outcomes, would it justify a 10% increase in the cost to the health service?
Yeah, that's difficult. That's difficult. I mean, if you are a patient, every straw that you can get, you take it. I mean, if you are a cancer patient and you are in a palliative setting, which means that you can't be cured anymore. Still, every straw that the doctor offers you grab it with both hands because you hope you can live a bit longer. So if a new immunotherapy or a new chemotherapy that may postpone your death for 2 or 3 or 4 months, you just take it. And it costs a lot of money. Yeah, it's an ethical discussion, Brendan. I don't know. can you say what this medication is too expensive, so we're not going to pay for it? Yeah. I don't know. I can imagine that for a government, it's a difficult decision to say, well, you're not entitled to have treatment because it's too expensive. When it does happen in the graph I showed you, the graph with the unmet needs in countries where, here, this graph here, where on the left, where people have low income, have about 20% of unmet medical needs, that they are just not being treated. And it's quite rough, of course.
Just a thought to ponder on. It's a very difficult thought.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. Maybe what you can do, but of course that's difficult. That's the same discussion as with euthanasia. If you try to sort of make a quality of life scale, and you say, well, your quality of life is that low, that we are just not gonna pay for your treatments anymore. So it's not now time for you to pass away. Yeah, that's harsh. That's harsh. But maybe you can, yeah, look at that. But it's all difficult, all very difficult.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your insight, Willem, and thank you to everyone who joined us today and who engaged in this very interesting discussion. It was really insightful, and thank you very much, Willem, for sharing all this data with us, as well as your suggested way forward. We all hope that the future is bright and that you know, positive things and changes happen very soon.
Okay.
In closing this event, I would like to thank you, Willem, as well as everyone for joining us, and to ask you if you would like to feedback on today's session and maybe suggest future topics for events. My colleague Keith will in a moment be posting a link to a short post-event feedback form. So do let us know your thoughts. We will be very happy to receive your comments. Also, if you are interested, next Thursday at the same time, we'll have another event of this series, Atlantic Circle in Conversation, where the focus will be STEM education, so science education, with our alumna from the class of '88. We hope to see some of you or all of you then. In the meantime, I would like to wish you a lovely rest of the week and to thank you once again, thank our speaker for delivering this fantastic presentation.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.